So I surprise a lot of people when I share that it's actually 1 in 5 people in America. So 20% of our population has some form of a learning difference. And I love your framing. I mean, I think it's learning abilities, but it's just a different learning ability than, the 4 in 5 people who learn a more traditional way. And, I'll say a couple more things around those stats because for me, if you think about 20% of our population, it actually constitutes what is one of the largest minority groups in our country. And what's amazing to me in thinking about that 20% is that the success rate and the failure rate on both ends are pretty extreme. So students who have learning disabilities or learning differences drop out of school twice as often as kids without learning differences. Overrepresentation of kids with learning differences in our federal prison population, 40% are illiterate or have a learning disability. And then if you look at the other side, the potential, you go into just the Fortune 500 companies in America, a third of the top 100 Fortune 500 companies, a third of the people who run those companies are dyslexic, which is an amazing statistic. And you can think about, everyone's probably heard about a celebrity or two. We have way more than a celebrity or two that have this learning difference. So you think about people like Whoopi Goldberg. What would life be like if we didn't have Whoopi Goldberg or Henry Winkler, or Tom Cruise? These are all people who have learning differences. So we have some great minds in our society that I feel like when we don't serve them well in our school system, we often are just throwing them away.
Right, and what a waste of potential. And, I know there's people out there that they might have children that they sense something's different, but they're not quite sure. So, David, what are some of the things, the classic things, the signposts of people that struggle with dyslexia and ADHD?
The first thing I want to highlight is actually what you just said. So if you sense that, for the folks listening, if you sense there's something going on different with your kid, there probably is. There's a lot of signposts, which I'm going to mention in a moment. Before that, there's actually kind of a feeling that I described when my mom was sitting in the classroom talking to my teacher, and she's saying, try harder. And she's like, there's something up because I know my kid is trying harder. I know these kids don't, these grades don't represent what my kid's doing. So there's something actually in the unseen that I think is important. But then there's some easy tells. So kids who learn to read late, kids who have trouble decoding words. So if you show them a word and they have trouble figuring out what are the sounds that are naturally associated with those letters, that's what dyslexia looks like. And in terms of attention issues, you hear a lot like, oh, I was so ADHD today. That's not really true. There's a difference between being a little distractible and being kind of generally distractible. So kids who sit down and then immediately 5 minutes later find themselves doing some other activity they didn't even know how they got to, or they go to the internet to look for a topic and 3 hours later they don't know what they're looking at anymore, but it has nothing to do with the thing they started with. It's kind of a general wandering of attention. Those are classic signs for ADHD or dyslexia. And what I would say is that if a certain part of the environment of a kid's life is not working for them, and then you put them in a different environment and suddenly they seem brilliant, then you really have a clue. So like for me, I struggled when I had to sit and read, but I could talk to tons of people. I love talking to people. It turns out to be the way I learn best. So when you see these strengths mirrored with these weaknesses, you know that something's up. And the best way to figure out what's going on is just take your kid to get tested.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I knew one family once where even though they had done testing, they had gone to the school because they thought something was wrong, and they asked over and over, what can we do? And every single agency kind of resisted and said, no, just he needs to try harder, do this, do that. And this gal eventually looked at the family history. And the family history was just rampant with dyslexia and just these brilliant, genius people that did these amazing, they were very well known. One was head of Chicago Bank, all these things. But it was rampant with autism and all these things. So it's not easy, is it, David, for people to figure this out sometimes?
No, and I think it's great to look at your family history, too. Dyslexic folks or, people who have autism or sort of broadly defined learning disabilities, there's a genetic component to this. So, now when I can look back at my family, I'm like, oh, right, ADHD, that probably came from my dad.
Yeah.
And if you look at his life, it makes a lot of sense. He did a lot of different things. He had kind of an ADHD life. So now, when I go wanted to have kids, I'm going to look at my kids and I'm going to keep an eye out, not knowing you never know what kind of kid you get, but I'm aware that it runs in families. And I'm not going to be scared of the label. That's the thing that's amazing to me. The kid gets tested and they don't have a learning disability, well, then it's not a learning disability, and you can move on and think about, well, why else might my kid be struggling? But to not get tested, to just think, oh, my kid's going to outgrow this, that seems ridiculous to me. Because at least if you have the test, you know exactly what's going on.